everyone for joining us. My name is Megan Jopp. I am the Executive Director for the town, and appreciate everyone joining us at the Wellesley High School tonight. I want to thank the school department for allowing us to use this space, and our great custodial team for setting it up. So tonight we're going to be having a presentation by our consultant, Barrett Planning Group, as well as having a facilitated dialogue. So tonight we had over 100 people register for this event, and for our Sunday meeting we have about 80 folks.
I think it's, in the 70s, which is great.
High 70s of individuals who have registered for that. There is not overlap. So as part of that, that also requires a lot of volunteers to assist us. So I want to thank many of our staff members that are here this evening, as well as our civil discourse, who are civil discourse facilitators, as well as the many members of the civil discourse community who are assisting us tonight. These are your fellow residents and neighbors, and we really appreciate them coming. So the strategic housing plan process, this was funded from CPC funds at annual town meeting last year. And the goal of this plan really is to do a number of things. One, the town through past years has done comprehensive plans and a unified plan that looks at how the town, how residents of the town, how members of the community through our business sector, our property owners, our renters want to see the town grow. We also conducted a housing production plan to try and achieve 10%, this mandatory goal of affordable housing, which we have achieved. That was in 2018. That plan expired in 2023. So we have a working group, which consists largely of housing departments in the town, folks who have a handle on housing and housing development. In addition, we brought in residents and some nonprofit groups to assist us in that. And so the strategic housing plan is looking at housing in a new and exciting way. As part of that, we're looking not just at affordable housing development, but certainly diversity of housing stock, market rate housing. We're still looking at affordable housing, creation of workforce housing, and really trying to hit multiple economic stratas within the town. And how are we going to do that? We want to hear from you. What do you want to see? What would you think is missing? What are things that you think would enhance the community or detract from the community? And so that's what we're going to focus on tonight. We've also are in the midst of conducting a town-wide housing survey. And so we've extended the date of that. If you have not taken the survey, you can get that survey online. And we would ask you to do that. We've extended it till November 25th. You also should have received a flyer in your utility mailer. If you have not yet, you're going to be getting it probably this week. So I want to thank the number of people that have registered for this. We have not turned one person away who's registered. So again, thanks to our volunteers, we can accommodate everyone that wanted to be here. And tonight, I also want to welcome everyone that's here, both a resident, a property owner, a commercial property owner representative, our nonprofit representative. We have some faith leaders here. And so, you are the people that make up our community. We welcome you all, and we look forward to a great discussion. I'm going to turn it over now to Lisa Olney. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I lied. I'm going to turn it over to Alexis Lazat from Barrett Planning. She's going to give a brief overview, about 20-minute presentation on housing in Wellesley.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here. One thing I just want to make sure that if you didn't sign in, that's totally fine, because most of you have pre-registered. So, if we know you're in your group, or if you're on the sign-in sheet, it's just so helpful for us to capture the attendees. And whenever there's any sort of outreach and it asks if you would like to provide your email, that is also so helpful for us, because our project list just keeps growing and growing. So we were able to make sure that people got email notifications about this opportunity, for example, because they had previously provided their email addresses. So we just really appreciate your engagement to date. Oh, sure. I'm like standing up too. There we go. Thanks. All right. So I'm just going to give a brief presentation. We've scheduled it for about 20 minutes. I'm going to try to keep it even more brief than that to stay on our timeline target, because the real rich part of this evening is the facilitated dialogues that we will be having. And I am just so excited that the Housing Task Force members of the task force suggested this strategy, because it is something that I've not done in a community meeting before to this level of really wonderful organization. So I'm just so impressed, and if you haven't done a civil discourse, participated in one before, I'm sure you'll be impressed this evening. So Megan had mentioned a housing task force made up of different members of the community. So the project team that's really kind of working behind the scenes on this, it's primarily who you see there. So it's the housing task force, town staff that you see listed there, and then from our firm, Barrett Planning Group. So we've been meeting with the task force monthly to discuss kind of where we are, what engagement we're looking to do, and what we learned from engagement thus far. So it's been really kind of an iterative process with this really wonderful task force. But they're not going to be the only officials, boards and committees involved, as you'll see when we go over what some of the next steps will be. And of course, the most important participants, though, are those of you who are here to share your input. I did want to give a big shout out again to the Civil Discourse Initiative volunteers. I think there's 28 of them here this evening because we have 14 groups. Most of them volunteers. So that is just phenomenal, and thank you so much. So we've already done some of what's on the agenda. We at Barrett are going to just be leading a brief presentation on some of the findings. I went around and distributed a handout that covers some of what we've learned in the process so far. It's very high level. When the draft plan gets released, you'll see on the schedule, there'll be a lot more rich detail to a lot of what you see there. It's very, very high level, and also this presentation is going to be pretty high level because we want to make sure you have time for the discussions, which are the heart of the evening. So after we do our presentation, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa, who will just give an introduction to how the dialogue format will go for those of you who have not participated before. And that's going to take about an hour and a half. And then as we are wrapping up, you will have the option of filling out a feedback form. We have an electronic version as well if you prefer that. In fact, on the handout that I provided you on the back, you should see a little QR code that will take you to the project page. And on that project page, we have the survey that Megan mentioned, and we will have a link to the electronic version of the feedback form as well. So I do want to give a sense of the timeline because, as I mentioned, we're meeting with this task force and really trying to, we started with a project scope that, as Megan said, was really focused on the fact that the town has already done a lot in recent years. So the previous housing production plan was adopted before the town had achieved that 10%, and the town has now met that. The town has also adopted zoning to comply with MBTA communities. The town expanded its inclusionary zoning fairly recently. So there's a lot that you have done, and we understand that. So as we started the project, we had an understanding of what the task force kind of, wanted us to explore as potential strategies and kind of what things we should look at with the needs. And then we've kind of understood that our community engagement, we kind of almost want to take a step back and really kind of talk broadly about housing as a community and what do you as a community want to prioritize when it comes to conversations about housing. So with that in mind, on our first community meeting, this timeline looked a little bit different. We actually, around this time, we would have been presenting potential draft strategies. And seeing how involved the community is in wanting to have these conversations, we knew we was not ready for that. And so that's why we ended up doing the survey. That was not originally in the project schedule. And so it has adjusted a little bit, but just to walk you through what has happened and what's going to be happening. So in the summer, we had a first community meeting. Show of hands, who attended that first community meeting? It was June 18th. Oh, wonderful. Oh, and I also have to say it's great to see not all the hands up because that means we have new faces here too. So We also had conducted through, I think, 3 different phases, small group interviews, starting with a list of contacts that we built that then grew as other people were interested in having those. If you go to the project website, there is a summary of those interviews and also a summary of that first community meeting. So we're now in this kind of phase 2 here, where we're here doing this community meeting tonight, and we have that survey that's now open through November 25th. So the remainder of the project, what we're planning to do is to take all the feedback, in addition to kind of the data-driven analysis that we've done, and from there, take a step back and say, okay, so what do you want to do with all of that? You know, where does the town want to go with its conversations about housing from there? And then, you know, in consultation with staff and the task force, the draft plan will be shared with a public review period. We haven't finalized exactly when that review period will be or how long it will be, because we want to make sure that the community is able to have another opportunity to provide substantial feedback. And then we would plan on presenting the plan to the select board and planning board. That would take place now in the winter months. So that's where we are in terms of the timeline. The handout that I provided to you, on the front, it has a lot of kind of high-level information, some demographic information, things about projections, things about your housing market, what it's looked like, you know, what it currently looks like, what it's looked like historically, just in terms of cost. A lot of those things are no big secret. You know that housing is expensive. So that information on that sheet, like I said, the plan will get a lot more kind of deep dive there. On the back is kind of a summary of the things that we've heard in terms of engagement to date, and also some of the barriers that often kind of lend themselves to opportunities that we've identified from those conversations and also just from our own analysis. But what I really want to focus on to kind of enrich and add to what you have there, I want to talk a little bit about kind of a more technical review of what currently is on the ground in your community. So understandably, you know, your community, you love your community, you love the neighborhoods that exist, and you love the open spaces that exist, the natural resources. So this is always one of my favorite maps to do. It's really just looking together at what is your natural environment, the open spaces that you have, water resources, wetlands, things like that, and your built environment. And then, you know, where do you have, there are, as you know, areas of Wellesley with kind of steeper slopes. So just kind of juxtaposing all that together to give you a sense of what is, how does your natural environment, your built environment weave together? Because that really kind of is going to be a big factor when thinking about where to kind of consider future housing, to whether it's for zoning amendments or for acquiring property or anything like that. But you know, one of the things that we've really kind of looked at is how complicated the zoning is by and large. And what I mean by that, so you can see here that you do have a lot of, these are residential districts. You have other districts I'll go over in a moment, but this is just the breakdown of your residential zoning districts. And you know, at first glance, it looks like you have a lot of variety with the general residence, the limited apartment, limited residence, multifamily. You know, you have all of these opportunities to create that kind of missing middle housing people talk about. And then when you look at the area that is zoned for that, it's you know, not very much. It's predominantly a single family residential community. So you can see the single residence districts together, it's about 70% of your total zoned area versus your other types of residential zones, which together come to about 2%. But you allow residential uses in other districts as well. So just kind of talking about where you also allow residential uses, and I do really want to give the caveat that the specific allowed residential uses really vary significantly by district, you know, from limited business to industrial and so on. But again, so if you look at the zoning, kind of just how much of your land can be used for some of these other housing types, you can see the breakdown. I do want to call out, while educational looks like that's a lot of land, the way your zoning is written currently, any residential uses other than, say, dormitories in those in those educational districts are limited to housing for faculty and other employees of the educational institutions themselves. So while that still meets an important housing need, because those are people who work in your community, it's not, just open to all, at least as it's written in your zoning. But you've done more. You also have some zoning overlays that are really, you have more zoning overlays than this, but these are the ones that are really specific to kind of encouraging residential development in specific areas. So you have your Wellesley Park Smart Growth Overlay District, which is a portion of that administrative professional district, your 40R district, if you will. And then you also have the residential incentive overlay, the RIO, which currently covers a small portion of the Wellesley Square area, and then also in the Lower Falls area. So that's where those are. I know that topic is still an active one in your community. And then you also have your MBTA community project areas, which are focused on existing districts. So that's kind of how your zoning all comes together. But then how does it translate to your residential uses? So you saw that most of your land area is zoned for single family, right? So it should come as no surprise then when you look at your actual residential uses, there are more residential use types than this. We just wanted to focus on some of the kind of the most well-known recognizable ones. But the single family homes make up, over 7,300 of the residential properties in your community. And then you also have your condominiums. But what this is looking at, one of the things that I think is quite helpful to look at is that single family, the average value per property. So if you look at the handout that you have when you're looking at the median single family sale price currently, it's about in alignment with that. So it's not that surprising. 1.7 million is the average assessed value for single family homes in Wellesley. So you do have a limited number of other kind of missing middle housing types, and one of the things that we've seen looking at the data historically is that there's some potential loss of 2 and 3 family homes that became condos, because there's a distinct point at which your number of condos did go up while other use types went down. So again, those kind of key zoning findings to date and how it relates to what you see there is that your zoning bylaw, like I said, it's very complex. You may not see that as a barrier, and it's intended to be very protective, and that's a good thing. Again, it protects the things that your community loves. So, but some of the things that we've observed is that you have these very specific zoning districts and layers of overlapping regulations and whatnot, and there's also just some confusion, different residential use types that might overlap or be unclear from one district to another. So it just makes it a little challenging to look at and understand what can go where. So I think even if your community, whatever conversations you have about zoning, it is helpful to just understand what you already can do and where, and how much of the land that relates to. So I had talked about the residential types, and so again, seeing that over 7,300 of your properties are for single family, it should come as no surprise. I know, unfortunately, it's a little hard to see with the coloring there, but it's most of that kind of the light tan area throughout the community. Those are all single family neighborhoods. And then you can see where the color gets darker, deeper kind of shades of brown. Those are your other housing types. It might be smaller multifamily or mixed use. And we did include some student housing there as well. And so it kind of aligns with those zoning districts I had talked about, where you can do different multifamily types. So it all kind of goes as you would expect. But because those single family homes are the predominant type in your community, it's really helpful for us to understand, and I think for you as a community to understand what that means, because that's where there's going to be a lot of opportunity and conversations to have. So looking at the age of your single family housing stock, just kind of understanding which neighborhoods are newer. But one thing that we heard a lot in the community engagement process was that you also have a lot of tear down activity in certain neighborhoods just over the years. And so when you look at that age of single family housing, those darker structures, those are the newer housing types. And the map I'm going to show you next is kind of just showing where there has been a lot of demolition, tear down activity. And it largely coincides with a lot of those areas. So those do not represent individual properties. They represent kind of identical, geographic nuggets, if you will. And so what this is analyzing is how many demolition permits, since I believe the data is from 2018 here, what is that relationship in terms of how many residential properties are within that little hexagon. And so when you see that kind of darker purple, that's where there have been more residential demolitions compared to the lighter pinks. And so it really allows you to see, like, these are the kind of things that frame your housing market. And so any conversations that you have about housing and the community's responsibility towards housing, you're considering what already is, what the market is, who are the people who live here, who are part of our community, and it all weaves together in a really rich way. And I think that's really what we're kind of hoping to have insight from you from these dialogues. So what I want to do now, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa, who's going to explain a bit about how this process will go, since you haven't participated in a dialogue before. And we're hoping that some of this information is helpful to you as you have these conversations. But really, it's just about your experience, and that's, I think, also what we want to bring to the table. So, with that, I will turn it over to you. Oops. Just be careful there. Your slide.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm Lisa Olney. I'm a member of the Select Board, and I'm a founding member of the planning team for the Wellesley Civil Discourse Initiative, which is hosting tonight's dialogue. So we started the Civil Discourse Initiative in 2020 in the middle of the pandemic, mainly because we were really concerned about sort of the growing tide of divisiveness and sense of isolation in our community, and we wanted to find a way to bring people together just to have discussions like we're having tonight. Really just to understand each other better. Over the past several years, we've worked with Essential Partners, which is a consulting group in Cambridge. We've trained more than 30 facilitators to lead dialogues, and we've held dialogues on a range of topics, including coping with COVID, individual and shared values, education, race, and building connections among town boards and committees. Our facilitators, many of whom are here tonight, are volunteers from all over the community, as Megan mentioned, members of the town staff, members of various organizations, and then just a lot of really great engaged residents. So why do we need a civil discourse initiative? People sometimes ask. We can probably all think of examples of when we really wanted more civility in our discourse. Especially given the current political climate. When we don't see the world the same way as someone else, we do tend to react in three ways. Fight, which is kind of attack mode. Flight, sometimes we just sort of get up and leave. Or freeze and just don't do anything. And none of this works very well in getting us beyond the disagreement to some kind of understanding of each other's points of view. So building a muscle to create connection and manage disagreement is really the central idea behind the Civil Discourse Initiative. And to do that, we use dialogue. Dialogue gives us a way to understand each other better and to bring people together even when we disagree. It's not about achieving agreement or about persuading each other. It's about understanding. So the goals for tonight's dialogue are really just to have you hear from each other and better understand the perspectives in our community on housing. It's also to provide feedback for the strategic housing plan that Alexis and Megan were talking about and to our town decision makers going forward. The dialogue format gives everyone a chance to share their views, so this is really just another tool in our toolbox for getting input from all of you. And so some of you may be familiar with this form of dialogue, but for those who are not, I'll just give you a quick sense of the elements. So in each of your small groups, there's a facilitator and a timekeeper note-taker. The facilitator is there to guide you through several dialogue questions. He or she is going to pose a question, followed by a moment for you to think about how you'd like to answer. And then everyone will have the same amount of time to speak. The timekeeper, note taker, keeps track of the time and then is going to also be taking notes to try to capture just the essential content from your comments without attribution. And then there's also going to be time toward the end for an unstructured, open discussion in which you can really ask each other questions. At the very end of the dialogue, you'll be invited to consider the key points that you want to share back to the broader community, and those will be posted on the Strategic Housing Plan website. But just to make sure you are aware, all the notes will go back to the consultant, so it's all fodder for the Strategic Housing Plan, again, without attribution to any specific person. All the facilitators are using the same script to help each group have a similar experience. And I'll just emphasize that the facilitator and the timekeeper note taker don't participate in the discussion. They're sort of in the background, there to support the dialogue and all the participants in your group. If questions about the subject matter come up, we don't really have time to cover those in this discussion. Again, this is really for you to share your own views, but we're going to keep track of all those questions so that we can follow up afterward. Lastly, I'll just go over these proposed communications agreements. So at the beginning of every dialogue, we offer these agreements for each group to follow, really just to help your conversation go smoothly. Your facilitator is going to give you the opportunity to suggest any additions or modifications to these until you're all comfortable that you can maintain them through the conversation. So I'll just go over them quickly. Pass or pass for now. You can say that in answer to any question, and you don't need to explain why. Speak for ourselves and allow others to do that as well. So we're just asking you to avoid speaking on behalf of anyone other than yourself for the purposes of this conversation. Avoid piggybacking on what others have said. So sometimes it's really tempting to just agree with what everybody else has said or with what you've just heard. But for this dialogue, we're really just asking you to concentrate on your own thinking and to share that. Speak one at a time, so no interrupting each other and no side conversations. That way everybody's listening to each person as you go around. Listen with resilience, so hang in there when you hear something that you may not agree with. And we really encourage you to use the open discussion period to get curious and ask each other questions about those views that you may not agree with. Honor the time limits, so when the timekeeper signals that your time is up, please finish your sentence, not your paragraph. Honor confidentiality, so you're welcome to share your insights after today, but not each other's stories or names. And please turn off your cell phones or any other devices or switch them to vibrate and no social media. So during the dialogue, the facilitator will be helping you maintain all of these agreements. And that may mean interrupting occasionally with a gentle reminder. So just please be patient with that. And with that, I'll just extend my thanks from everyone in our initiative for you coming tonight and participating with us. We're going to just now take a pause and try to push the tables apart a little bit because we're a little close together and we wanted everyone to be able to see the screen. And we'll also just be bringing some easels around. So if everybody can just hang tight for 1 minute.